Finding My Virginity by Richard Branson. If there's one thing about Richard that stands out to me, it's the fact that he's never afraid to try new things. This book outlines a lot of his different businesses and ventures, the failures that he's gone through, and it really helps bring into perspective that just because he's a billionaire and he's got this huge successful company doesn't mean that they don't have their bad days. In his new biography, he likes to portray himself as the kind of the carefree hippie, but it almost seems like there's a little bit more going on, a little more thinking going on than he may lead on to. Like, for example, when they offered to buy his airline for, I think it was like $150 million off of something like a $30 million investment. He had the stones to turn it down right in front of the media and has since built it into a multi-billion dollar company, going from Virgin Australia to Virgin Atlantic and so on. He's proven time and again that even though he has that hippie vibe, he's still not an idiot. And that's probably why he's a billionaire. I really did enjoy this new book, but there's one thing about it that kind of stuck out. There's a lot, if you've read his other books, then there's going to be a lot of repetition with this one. He covers a lot of the same blunders that he had. Not all the same, but pretty close to the same as his other biography. That being said, that book was written a while ago, and so there's some things that have happened since then in his life that aren't covered. For example, the explosion with Spaceship Two and dealing with that disaster. And speaking of Virgin Galactic, one thing I thought was hilarious was Richard Branson makes it sound like it was kind of a quick decision to get involved in the spaceship company and said, you know what, screw it, let's do it. And jumped in, invested, and here we are today with their private space company. The end, basically. I mean, there's some little bit there of him wondering if the rocket's going to perform as expected, going there to watch the tests, and obviously the tragedy where that killed one of the pilots, which, by the way, it does go into why that happened. I always thought it was the rocket exploded, but apparently some other reason that he mentions in the book. I'll let you find that out when you read it. But he makes it sound like kind of a quick acquisition of the company, and then kind of both feed into it. But if you read the other perspective of everyone else that worked at Scaled Composites in the book How to Build a Spaceship, which I've also reviewed down below, you get the other side of perspective from the Scaled Composite team and how they're basically going on fumes building this rocket ship. Richard Branson was kind of a potential investor, but kind of was hemming and hawing until finally at the end, when they had basically a pretty viable product, Richard Branson came in, wrote him a check for branding, and put Virgin on it. And then during the last and final test, he strategically parks his jet with Virgin across it right at the end of the runway, right where all the cameras are going to see. So if nothing else, Richard Branson is a genius marketer, but it's just funny to get the two different sides of that story. Richard Branson's side of, I just jumped in, did a spaceship company, and the other side with Kurt Butan and his team and how they're kind of like, is this guy going to invest? Was he just a tire kicker or what? So kind of interesting there. Possibly some of the things are a little bit biased, but I mean, for the most part, it did. The stories kind of match, but at the same time, not really. You have to read them both to check it out. And let me know what you think. Maybe I'm reading into it too much. That being said, space is very expensive. So he has his different, I guess you'd call them his competitors that he has his dealings with. So Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and also Larry Page with their satellite constellation that they're planning on building. But like I said, okay, Branson is a billionaire, but space is really, really expensive, and the chance of not seeing any kind of a return is very high. So one thing that was really kind of hilarious, Richard Branson ended up flying to Abu Dhabi and meeting with the Sheikh, who I think is the richest man in the world. And Richard Branson was well known enough to get into the door, but he still had to pitch to these guys like he was just like a nobody. This goes to show that everything's relevant, including wealth. But luckily, Abu Dhabi invested, and now we have our spaceport in the desert and many more spaceships to come, hopefully, from the venture. But that's just one aspect of the book. He goes into a lot of his other blunders, when his hot air balloon fell into the ocean, and so on. There's plenty of them. He's got a really long list. As a matter of fact, at the end of the book, there's an appendix of all of his near-death experiences. I don't know how he's still alive. Based on that list, he should have died years ago, but here he is, still kicking. And by the way, the book does almost have a vibe of like it's like his goodbye note. Like, he is getting up in years, but he reads it at the end of the book. He reads his goodbye notes to his kids that he had written before his adventures, and it almost sounds like it's like he's wrapping up his life with a book. So it's got that kind of a creepy vibe. Definitely worth the read. But like I said, it probably is best if you haven't read his other books. If you haven't read his other books, I'd probably read this one. If you're only going to read one, But if you have read his other books, there's going to be some repetition. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys next time.